Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of PhotoBiz Live. This is Danny from the PhotoBiz team, and today we're going to be joined by Jim Zuckerman for a webinar, Understanding Flash. So Jim is going to be helping you guys kind of take away some of the mystery of Flash. He was letting me know, and I've had a chance to look at his presentation. You guys are in for a real treat today, so be sure to take notes. If you're not familiar with Jim, Jim is the author of 21 books on photography, including 6 ebooks. He actually teaches online with betterphoto.com, and his work has been recognized internationally for many years. That's how many of you may have found him. He also travels the world and has these amazing photo tours where he takes his students to many exotic locations. You guys can visit his website at jimzuckerman.com. And he also has a free monthly newsletter with lots of information that you guys will find very informative, and you can subscribe right at the front page of jimzuckerman.com. So be sure to check that out, and I'll make sure to send you guys a link inside of the chat room window so you can click and get right over to it. So in addition to getting the opportunity to learn from Jim in today's webinar, we're going to have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. You guys can submit your questions using our chat tool that comes built in the webinar software, and they're going to be answered at the end of the presentation. If you guys are on social media and you're a fan of Twitter, we do have a discussion going online. We do have a hashtag we use with all of our webinars. That hashtag is PhotoBizLive. So it's just hashtag PhotoBizLive. And if at any point during today's webinar you have any difficulty hearing Jim or seeing the slides on the screen, just use the comment box and let me know. You can message me as the user PhotoBiz Web Solutions, the organizer, and I will do my best to help you troubleshoot. We're also going to be recording the webinar, and it'll be available for replay within 24 hours on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/photobiz. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to it. And we'll have that webinar online, as I mentioned. So if you have to leave, no worries. We'll have a recording of it. So I wanted to go ahead and bring Jim on. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Danny. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to go ahead and let you get right to your presentation. I know you have your first slide ready to go, and I'm going to let you take over from here.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all of you for joining. The reason I wanted to do this webinar for PhotoBiz is because I know very well that pretty much everybody is insecure and uncomfortable and even intimidated by Flash. This is not only true of amateurs and beginners, but it's also true, this may surprise you, of people who've been photographing for 40 years like myself. Flash is, it's hard to see what's going on because of the brief burst of light. You just can't look at the shadows and judge the exposure like you can with ambient light. So I hope this will demystify a lot of the mysteries that you deal with every time you pick up your flash. Let me make 2 initial comments. First, those of you who only have pop-up flashes, you will learn from this webinar, but I'm orienting this mostly to people who can take the flash off the camera if they choose to do that. And second, this may be controversial. It's definitely going to be a surprise, but flash is really a trial and error proposition. There are so many variables that produce inaccurate exposures that you really have to take a picture, determine the problem, and then fix it. And this webinar is basically about how to fix those problems. So here are the topics I'm going to discuss in the webinar. First, common problems with flash, then important features of the flash, fill and bounce flash, that's very important. My personal favorite, and one that I have been using more and more, is off-camera flash. It's amazing, absolutely amazing, the creativity that you have by simply taking the flash off the camera. And finally, diffusion options. How do you diffuse the light of a portable flash? And by the way, this is all about portable flash. We're not talking studio lighting here at all. Okay, so the common problems with flash, number 1 are unwanted reflections. Whenever you photograph into a mirror or glass or chrome, or in this case, a varnished wooden carved train that I bought in Indonesia, it's going to reflect the flash. How do you solve that problem? And this applies to pop-up flash as well as the portable, more sophisticated flashes. Simply move off to the side and photograph the subject at an angle. that eliminates reflections. In this case, however, you have another kind of a problem. This is a sawfish that I photographed at the world-class aquarium in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and you actually walk through a tunnel of lucite. So I'm shooting straight up at this fish, or I guess it's a fish, just floating right above me. The problem is that the lucite was curved, so I couldn't just angle differently and eliminate the reflection because there's just reflections everywhere due to the curvature of that lucite. So in this case, there is no solution to eliminate the reflections except to use Photoshop to replace the background like I did here. This particular background was photographed at SeaWorld, looking up at the underside of one of the big pools there through a big piece of plexiglass, and that solved the reflection problem. Another problem that is constantly in evidence of every flash picture you take is light fall off. That means that the front of the picture is lighter than the back of the picture because of the diminishing power of the light as it travels away from the light source. And it diminishes according to what scientists call the inverse square law. This simply means that as light travels twice the distance, let's say from 5 feet to 10 feet, it is diminished by 4 times, not twice what you'd expect. Look at the 2 examples here. This is a shot I did in Venice. I lead a photography workshop every year at the Carnival in Venice, and it's really spectacular. On the left-hand picture, the 3 models are equidistant to the camera and the flash. Same distance, and they are all exposed perfectly and correctly. The right-hand picture, I angled slightly so the model in yellow is closer to me than the model in blue, and even though this is not as dramatic as the Apache fire dance that I photographed here at night, still you can see the subtle light fall off, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about that other than change your angle. Here's an example of a picture I took in the Nashville Zoo. It's a clouded leopard, and even though they are nocturnal and the dark background is really appropriate because they are active at night, nevertheless, if you wanted a good exposure on the background, you have to use another technique than just simply putting your camera on program and shooting. Here's a performance in ballet on stage, and again, the dancers are exposed perfectly, and you see the light fall off there. Another problem, and I find this extremely annoying, is overexposed foregrounds. When you get very close to the subject and you have something, a few feet away and something even further than that, you're going to have a problem with overexposed foregrounds. In this particular case, here I'm laying on the ground, and I took this picture specifically to illustrate this point, but what I could have done is stand up, and then the grass wouldn't be so close to the foreground and it wouldn't be overexposed. Another problem, unwanted shadows. This happens because the flash is not directly over the lens or the lens axis. So for example, here's the picture of a G9, a Canon G9, and you can see that the flash is not directly over the lens. That creates a shadow. If you take a vertical picture, like this one is, you have a very pronounced shadow because look at the flash and where it is in relation to the lens axis. It's significantly off-center, and that creates a shadow on the opposite side of the flash. Sometimes pronounced shadows can be interesting, artistic, and so on, but usually they're annoying. Another problem is red eye. I don't know if you can see on your computer monitor, but the boy on the left has red in his eyes, and a lot of flash and camera systems now have red eye elimination features. That helps a lot. The best way that you can eliminate that is to move the flash off the camera or have the person looking away from the flash. That also is a good solution. I've always maintained that on-camera flash is the least attractive type of artificial light that photographers use, and the reason is because it's very flat. It's dimensionless. And here's an example. This is a nice picture taken in Carnival again. I balanced the lighting on the model with the dawn sky. The lighting is flat on her, and it's just not as attractive as when you have lighting coming from a different angle. A real big problem is inconsistent exposures. The problem with this is that flash exposure is just like in-camera ambient light exposure in that it reads middle gray. Middle tone subjects are what is designed to give you a good exposure on, and in this particular case, this is my puppy 5 months ago when I first got him. The center of the frame is white, the periphery is dark, and the camera may not give you an exposure that you're happy with. Maybe too light, maybe too dark, and you see this all the time with all kinds of subjects. Inconsistent flash exposure is a problem, and I'll talk about how to address that in a little bit. Okay, so let's go over some important features of the flash, and then we'll get right into the creativity of it all. You have a setting on the flash, Canon users ETTL and Nikon users ITTL. You also have manual. 99.9% of all of your picture taking with flash will be set on ETTL or ITTL. Those are the automatic exposure modes. Once in a while you will use manual, but virtually all the time ETTL or ITTL is what you will use. Again, those are the automatic exposure settings. What I feel is the most important feature on the flash is the flash exposure compensation. On your camera, you also have an exposure compensation feature, but that is for taking pictures with ambient light, landscapes, wildlife, and so on, portraits outside. The flash exposure compensation allows you to increase or decrease the exposure on your flash in 1/3 f-stop increments. This is extremely important, and if you don't know where this is on your flash, you must find out immediately because you'll use it all the time once you understand how it's used and how it can correct any poor exposures that you take. Slave mode allows you to take the flash off the camera and trigger it wirelessly from some device. Radio transmitter, I'll talk later about the difference between a radio signal and an infrared signal in terms of triggering flash, but some flash units now have built-in radio transmitters like the new Canon 600 EX, and so it can be triggered wirelessly without any other attachment. The test button. This is important because you can fire the flash with just the push of a button, and sometimes, as I'll show you later, this comes in very handy. And the zoom feature allows you to focus the light from the flash. It's like a built-in Fresnel lens, and by focusing the zoom, let's say for a lens of 105 millimeter or 135 or 200, you focus that light, and what that allows you to do is get an accurate exposure further away from the flash than if you had a wide coverage for like a 24 millimeter. Okay, let's talk about fill flash. Fill flash is used for one big reason, and that is to adjust the lighting on the subject compared to the background. In this case, my young little model here would have been in shade. Her face was facing away from the light, and so I used flash on the camera to add additional light to make her the same exposure or close to the background. You can see the dot of light in her eyes to show you the flash was used, and what it does here is prevent the face from being too dark. Here's another example of fill flash. Now notice the flat lighting like I talked about before. It's still a flat light, but it's a way to balance a dark subject with a lighter background. Another example, this is a margay in Costa Rica, a relative of the ocelot and jaguar. And it was in the jungle, very dark situation, a very rare sighting, and I was able to use the flash to balance it with the background. This is how many people use fill flash, and it's something that I rarely do because I just don't like the look. I feel that outdoor portraiture is much more attractive in overcast conditions, in the shade, when the lighting is soft and diffused. The picture on the left was taken in harsh daylight, and the brim of the hat is casting a very dark shadow. On the right, I used fill flash. The flash used on the right-hand picture filled in the shadows, but it also made the girl's skin a little bit lighter, but most photographers consider that a fair trade-off because you've opened up those shadows. The reason I don't like this look is because contrast is just not very attractive on portraiture. Much better would have been to take her in the shade of a house or under a tree and use the soft lighting that way. But if you have no choice, this is one option. I don't think it's a good one, but it's really the only thing you have if there's no shade available. Okay, how do you expose correctly for fill flash? Let me give you a comparison between the camera and the flash. You have controls on both. You have controls on the camera and controls on the flash. Only 2 factors, so it's not that complicated. You have 3 auto exposure modes on the camera. You have program, aperture priority, and shutter priority. With program, if you use program and ETTL on the flash, remember the automatic exposure mode on the flash, you get a good exposure in the subject, but you get a dark background. I'm sure you've seen that a million times in your pictures. This is true especially indoors or at twilight or at night when the background is darker than the subject. You use your flash and the person or the animal or whatever you're shooting is exposed correctly, but the background goes dark. That's what happens when you use program mode on the camera. Here's an example. This is taken in a large room in a palace in Venice, and I used flash on the model and on the sofa, and you can see that the background is almost black. It's a huge room. The flash just did not reach back there. You can see the chandelier there, dimly lit. Of course, it was much brighter to my eyes, but that's what happens when you use program mode and ETTL. Aperture priority. Here's what happens when you use AV. You get a good exposure in the foreground and a good exposure in the background, but the price you pay is a slow shutter speed. And the reason why the shutter speed is going to become slow is because assuming that the background environment is dark, that's, after all, when we use flash in a dark environment, you flash the person near you, but the background doesn't receive the flash. So the shutter stays open longer to gather enough light on the background to equalize the 2 exposures between the background and the foreground. When you use aperture priority, it's a good idea to use a tripod, because if the shutter becomes too slow, let's say a 15th of a second or an 1/8 or a 1/6, the background is going to be blurred and the subject will have a ghosting kind of effect where the flash will give you a sharp picture, but the long exposure accumulating the ambient light will give you a second exposure of the subject. You see, so if you hand hold this, chances are part or all of the picture is going to be blurred when you use aperture priority and flash. The exposure will be great, but it won't be sharp unless you use a tripod. Here's an example where I used aperture priority on a tripod and the flash exposed the model, and the aperture priority gave me a perfect exposure on the sunset background. Okay, do we ever use shutter priority when using flash? No, there's really no need to. The only thing you need to worry about with your shutter is that it has to sync with the flash. And for those of you who don't know what that means, when you take a picture with flash, the shutter opens, the flash fires, and the shutter closes. If the shutter opens too fast and closes too fast, in other words, it opens and let's say it just starts to close, then the flash goes off, half of your picture is going to be black. You have to sync the flash with the camera, meaning you have to choose a shutter speed that is slow enough to open, let the flash fire, and close. That is usually, on most cameras today, either 1/200th of a second or a 2/50th. There are some cameras that will sync at a higher speed, but not that many. Here's where you have to put your thinking cap on and really focus on what I'm talking about, because this is the bottom line to controlling flash exposure. If you use manual mode on the camera, but ETTL or ITTL on the flash, in other words, the automatic exposure on the flash, but manual mode on the camera, the lens aperture and the distance from the flash to the subject controls the flash exposure on the foreground. Let me say that again. There are two factors that control the exposure on your foreground when you use manual on the camera and ETTL on the flash. The two factors are lens aperture and distance from the flash to the subject. The shutter speed and the lens aperture control the exposure on the background or the ambient light. Okay, so let me go back to this picture right here. The exposure on the model is determined by the flash and the aperture. I'm sorry, but by the shutters, but by the distance of the flash to the subject and the aperture. The exposure on the background was determined by the shutter speed and the lens aperture. And that's really important. Let's take a look at the frog picture here on the lower left. This is done at my semi-annual frog and reptile workshop. It's a macro situation. I put the flash on ETTL, the camera on manual, and I chose the lens aperture of f32. Because the flash is on ETTL, automatic, it knows what f32 requires in terms of light output. Okay, so manual, f32, and the flash was ETTL. The picture on the right, in order for me to expose correctly for the trees out in the backyard there, as well as the young girl, I had to deal with two different exposure situations. The young girl is exposed by the distance of the flash to her plus the aperture, not shutter speed. You see that? The shutter speed has nothing to do with the exposure on her, but the shutter speed and the lens aperture has everything to do with the ambient light outside. So you have two different considerations. Let me show you exactly how to do that. Here's the same situation. This is my wife on the one and only cruise I've taken. She's on the stairway. I wanted to expose her with flash correctly with the background. So how do you expose for this? First, you take a light reading on the background with your normal in-camera meter. Then you have to raise the ISO until the shutter speed produces a sharp picture. In this case, I use 1/50th at f4 with 800 ISO. So you take a light reading on the background, and let's say you get 1/30th at f4. Well, 1/30th, you might get away with, but it's really a little bit slow. And so you want to raise the ISO until you get 1/50th or 1/60th. That's all there is to it. Then you look at your exposure settings. In this case, 1/50th at f4. So then what you do is you set the flash to ETTL like I've been talking about, and the camera to manual exposure mode, and you shoot. The camera will know what f-stop you have, in this case f4. So you'll get a perfect exposure on the foreground because of the automatic ETTL setting in the flash, and you'll get a perfect exposure on the background because you set the exposure based upon your light meter. Let me go over that one more time because this is really important. First, you take a light reading on the background with your built-in camera meter. Then you look at it and you determine if your shutter speed is if it's okay, then leave it. But if it's too slow, you have to raise the ISO until your shutter speed is 1/50th or 1/60th or 100th. Then you set the flash to ETTL, the camera is on manual exposure mode, and you shoot, and it comes out perfect like this. Finally, if it doesn't come out perfect, you adjust the exposure on the flash using the flash exposure compensation. Remember, I told you that it adjusts the flash output in 1/3 f-stop increments. That means that if you say, well, the exposure is a little bit too bright on the person in the foreground, okay, so dial in -1/3 or -2/3, shoot again. Do not feel that you don't know what you're doing if your flash pictures don't come out perfectly the first time or the second time or the third time. Professional photographers know that it's trial and error, and all we do is we take a picture and then adjust the flash output, adjust the f-stop if we need to, until we get what we want. In the past, studio photographers used Polaroid test prints. Before we had digital cameras, they used Polaroid test prints so that they could determine the shadows, how the shadows fell, how the highlights and shadows related to each other, and what the exposure was. And they used Polaroid test prints because you can't see the pictures. With a photo flood, yeah, you can study the shadows and so on, but not with a flash. Now we have the wonderful advantage of the LCD monitor on the back of the camera, and we can see exactly what we get. So that's our Polaroid test. And again, if the picture is too dark or too light, don't think you don't know what you're doing. Just make the correction with the flash exposure compensation feature, and then you'll get a perfect picture. Here's another scenario in Venice where I first took an exposure reading on the background. I looked at my f-stop. Now this is outside, so it wasn't that dark. So my shutter speed was fast enough. Okay. I looked at my f-stop, 5.6, flash on ETTL, and bingo, it's perfect. Okay, bounce flash is something that a lot of people use, and for good reason. Look at these two pictures. The picture on the left is direct on-camera flash, highly reflective because of the varnished wood. And the picture on the right, I simply bounce the flash off the ceiling. In order to use bounce flash, your flash head has to angle upward, like at a 45-degree angle or a 60-degree angle. This is where pop-up flashes are problematic because they can't do that. But a normal portable flash can angle upward, and if you look closely at the right-hand picture, it's a little bit yellowish. And the reason it is because the ceiling in this bedroom of my house is painted beige. So if you bounce flash, it's going to take on the color of the ceiling. The other factor that you have to know is that you need to get back far enough, and this may only be 5 feet, but far enough for the light to angle up and come back down again at a reasonable angle. In other words, you don't want the flash to come down, or the light from the flash to come down directly overhead. It's much more attractive if you get back some and let the flash go up and down at a decent angle. Here's another example of a bounce flash. This is the dog who's just making all the noise. He's laying on the bed, and look at the light distribution in this picture. He is exposed well. He's not blown out. The pillows on the bed in the background are nicely exposed, and the reason that happened is because bouncing the light distributes the light over the entire room in a very even way. You don't get that light fall off. So bounce flash is one very important anecdote to the light fall off problem. Okay, let's talk about off-camera flash. I love this technique. It's very dramatic, as you can see here. Notice how the model is lit, from the left. I had a friend hold the flash off to the side, and it's a beautiful type of light. Compare this picture with the last one. Same location in Venice, but the lighting here is flat. Here, it's dramatic. Big, big difference. Here's a portrait I did near where I live of a tattooed bride in front of graffiti. I thought that was sort of fitting. The light is off to the side at about an 80-degree angle to the lens axis. And look at the texture on the wall. Look at the lighting on her face and on her dress. Side lighting, as we all know, is beautiful. And this is how you can get side lighting. Simply taking the flash off the camera. In my frog and reptile workshop, I demonstrate off-camera flash a lot because even with macro subjects is very effective. This is a juvenile alligator. He was about 3.5 feet long, and I held the flash right in front of his nose. Look how the light skimmed the reptilian skin, creating that incredible texture. Much, much better than direct on-camera flash. This was in Costa Rica, and we baited these pacas, that's what they are, P-A-C-A, these rodent-like animals, with some food. And again, I had somebody off to the right hold the flash and light them from the side. Look how all the hair is illuminated with that side lighting. It's really beautiful. You can backlight when you take the flash off the camera. This again is at the frog workshop. I had a big leaf and the frog was on the other side. Again, somebody held the flash right behind the leaf and gave me an incredible silhouette. All of these possibilities can happen simply by taking the flash off the camera. This is a performer in Bali, Indonesia, a pretty unique mask, and I hired the dance group so my photography tour people could get just classically perfect pictures, and I demonstrated this off-camera flash technique. Again, all it is just the flash being held off to the side to give you very dramatic lighting. A seashell. This was photographed on a piece of black velvet with a hole in the velvet and cardboard beneath that, and then the flash was coming right through the hole in the cardboard. All it is backlighting. This one is really interesting. You remember earlier in the features of the flash I talked about the test button and how you just push it and the flash goes off? That's what I had to do here. This was in an aquarium, this time in Chattanooga. They have a beautiful aquarium, and these are moon jellies. They're floating in this cylindrical tank about 6 feet in diameter, floor to ceiling, and they're moving very slowly, and it's very, very dark in the room. So to photograph them, you have to use flash. The problem, of course, is that the cylinder of the tank is curved, and so you'd get a terrible reflection. So what I did was I had my wife hold the flash on the opposite side of the tank, and when I counted to 3, she pushed the test button. So when I counted to 3, I opened my shutter, she pushed the test button, and then the shutter closed. I gave her half a second, and in that half a second, she could do it. She missed a couple of times, but half a second was long enough, so I didn't want any ambient light. The problem was, how do you determine the exposure for this? I had no idea, because, how often do you photograph a translucent moon jelly? So what I did was exactly what I told you in terms of using the flash exposure compensation. We took a picture. I looked at the results. They were grossly overexposed. So I cut the power down. I closed my lens aperture, took another picture. This one was much closer, but not quite perfect. We did it again. This time it was perfect, and that's how I got an incredible exposure on this. Like I said earlier, trial and error. Even after 40 years of photography, you still have to use trial and error. Okay, how do you trigger the flash when it is off camera? There are 2 different systems. One, you can use an infrared beam. There are devices like Canon has the STE2, which emits an infrared beam, and it strikes the flash which is being held off camera, and it fires. This works great, but it's limited, and the limitation is that the transmitter and the flash have to be in a line of sight. In other words, the flash has to see the transmitter. If something gets in the way, then it won't fire. This happened when I was shooting in Carnival in Venice. I put my backpack on the ground, rested my flash against it, walked about 6 feet away to get the angle, and I was photographing a costumed model. Well, another photographer that I didn't know came up to photograph the same model, kneeled down between me and my flash, and of course it wouldn't fire because he was breaking that infrared beam, that line of sight. Alternatively, you can use a radio signal. The radio signal will trigger the flash anywhere. If the flash is behind a subject for backlighting, it'll fire it. If it's in the next room, around a corner, it has a range, of course, but it does not depend upon line of sight. The Pocket Wizard is a device that you can hook up to your camera, and it offers this radio signal technology. Or, as time goes on, more and more flashes will have this built in, like I mentioned earlier, the Canon 600EX. So those are the 2 systems that you can trigger the flash when it is off the camera. How do you choose the placement of the flash? Well, guess what? It's trial and error. You don't know exactly how the shadows are going to fall or how your subject's face is going to look when the flash is at 45 degrees, 60 degrees, 90 degrees. You have to try it and see if you like it. This picture was taken again at the Frog and Reptile Workshop, and I took probably 6 or 7 shots moving the flash in different locations until I got exactly what I wanted. Again, after 40 years of experience, I couldn't just go there and place the flash at a certain place and that's it, I got it. I had to try, fail, until I liked it based upon what I saw on the LCD monitor on the back of the camera. Another Carnival in Venice shot. In this case, I had somebody hold the flash not at 90 degrees, but more like 120 degrees to the lens axis. In other words, a little bit behind the model. Again, it's a different kind of a look. Look at the difference here between the left picture, direct on-camera flash, and it's a great picture. If that's all I had, I'd be thrilled with it because the costume was so outrageous. I have some light in the background. This is at dusk after the sun had set, so I'm happy with that. But the picture on the right has texture, dimension, depth. There's a richness to it simply because the flash was off the camera. Here's some other examples of using flash off camera. The picture on the left, both of these were taken in Ireland. But the one on the left is sort of unique because the person holding the flash, a member of my photography tour group, was kneeling down behind this foreground rock wall so we can't see her, and she was aiming the flash at the cross. So the entire scene is muted except that light on the cross. I thought that was pretty dramatic. The picture on the right, I just laid the flash in the grass, angling up at the cross, and again, it highlights the cross in a unique way, gives it a very different kind of a look, and it's just another way of being creative with using your flash off camera. Okay, here's some diffusion options you have, but first let me explain why you want diffusion. Diffusion softens light. Light can be very harsh, and a point source of light is the harshest type of lighting that you have. And the sun is a point source of light. Of course, if you were 500,000 miles away from the sun instead of 93 million miles away, it'd be a huge thing in this, in space, and the lighting would not be soft. I'm sorry, it wouldn't be harsh. It would be soft. But because it's so far away, it is very harsh because it's a point source of light. With flash, if you can diffuse it somehow, and there are many ways of diffusing flash, you soften it, you get a much more attractive type of lighting. This applies to macro, it applies to portraits. So the portrait of the young girl on the left was taken with on-camera flash, direct, no diffusion. The picture on the right was taken with diffusion. In this case, I used a white umbrella. I just took my portable flash, shined it into the white umbrella, and it gave this beautiful wraparound kind of diffused light. Big difference. This picture is one of my favorite portraits of her. I have an ebook on flash which backs up and reinforces all of the stuff I've been talking in this webinar. But I want to show you something really interesting. Look at the lighting on her face, beautiful, diffused. Now look how I did it. Here's a friend of mine holding up 4 pieces of paper that I taped together. I took 4 white computer pieces of paper and just scotch taped them together into basically a homemade diffusion panel. He is holding in his right hand my Canon flash. It's shining through that paper, and this is the result. Absolutely beautiful diffused light. Didn't cost anything, and you can do this right in your own home with a portable flash as long as you can take it off the camera. Here are some diffusion devices you can get. They all do the same thing. My 2 favorites are the OmniBounce, which is the second from the left, and the Gary Fong diffuser, which is the second from the right. In other words, the 2 middle pictures are my 2 favorites. It's just a plastic thing that fits on top of your flash. The other 2 are okay, but in my opinion, they don't give you the kind of soft light that I really like with the 2 plastic diffusers. But let me say something very important about this. Remember I said that a point source of light is harsh. The bigger the light source, like a white umbrella or a soft box in a studio, or the white pieces of paper you tape together, a big white light source is softer than a harsh, smaller light source. But what happens if you put a diffuser on your flash and you walk back 20 feet? That flash with the diffuser is now essentially a point source of light. The point is that these diffusers work as long as you are close to your subject. The further you are away, the less diffused they are, and after 15, 20 feet, the diffusing device will have 0 effect. If you have it or don't have it, you won't see a difference. You have to be very close, and when I say very close, I'd say within 10 feet. That will give you the most diffusion that you can have. Okay, well, this ends the webinar. If you would like to go to my website, as Danny said in the beginning, you can subscribe to my free monthly newsletter. It's really more like a magazine, actually. And you can look at my photography tours and ebooks and so on. And Danny, we can take questions now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jim. Learned a lot of information in a short period of time. Took a lot of notes here. So now we're opening up everybody, for questions. So go ahead and feel free to send them in. Looks like a few came in earlier. The first question here. Okay, the first question from Lewis. He says, on AV, do you set a particular f-stop?
It's a good question. The f-stop I choose depends upon how much depth of field I want. When I do macro photography, in my opinion, macro photography requires complete depth of field. I know a lot of photographers and photographic instructors use shallow depth of field to blur everything except a sliver of the picture. Personally, I don't like that. If you're going to go to the trouble to photograph something beautiful with great texture and detail, you want to see that texture and detail with tack-sharp clarity. So I will choose f32 in that case. When I photographed my wife in the cruise ship, if I would have chosen f32, I don't think that would have worked, even though the background maybe would have been a little sharper, because I may not have had enough power from the flash, because remember, these are portable flashes, and I was about 15 feet away. So the further you are away from the subject, the less power you have, and the options for various f-stops are not there. So there's a lot of factors to deal with. If you're close to your subject, you can use any f-stop you want for depth of field. If you purposely want the background to be blurred, then you use a large f-stop. So that's how I approach it.
All right, great. And many questions just came in, so thank you for all the attendees for the great questions. I'm going to try and get to as many as I can today. All right, so next question comes in from Barry. If you don't have another person to hold your off-camera flash, what do you mount it on besides the ground?
Well, Barry, that's a good question. Sometimes it's tough. You find whatever you can find. I mean, you could carry with you a very slender aluminum stand, and like, for example, in Carnival in Venice, some photographers do that. You can use a bench, a railing, a trash can, whatever you can find. Lighting with the flash on the ground isn't necessarily bad, though. It gives you a pretty unique angle, and sometimes I have liked very much those pictures. If there's absolutely nothing around to put the flash on, then there's nothing you can do. So if you anticipate using off-camera flash, you can buy a very light, very thin stand that you can mount the flash on, and that's a solution.
All right. Yeah, I've also heard of a lot of photographers, and Barry, I'm sure if you look on when you look online, you'll find a lot of different stands or tools you can get to mount your flash to, so that shouldn't be too hard to find. Next question came in here that and it is about the stand again, Jim. So was there any particular one that you happen to use, any brand you could recommend for light stands?
It's been so long since I bought them. I can't think of one offhand, but go onto any of the online retailers and just look for very light aluminum light stands that fold down into nothing. I have one when the legs fold up, it's not much thicker than the main shaft itself. And so you could just strap that to your backpack. I'm sorry, I can't think of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, and you know what? And if you don't mind me dropping in a recommendation, one that fellow photographer, PhotoBizer, had mentioned. I have no personal experience, but a lot of people using them called cheetah stands, because they have a cheetahstand.com. They have like a compression system in it. So pretty cool idea. Check that out. So moving into the next question here, I'm going to go ahead and bring up another question that we have from Greg. Greg asks, for beach portraits, would you recommend a portable strobe versus a Speedlight? And I see you're trying to pull that stand up. Sorry about that. We'll get to your question in just a second, Greg. Yeah, we'll get to your second in just a moment.
find one here. I just went on to B&H's website, and
Oh yeah, there's
there's
tons of them.
many listed, and just look at the specifications for the weight, and just get the lightest one because you don't need really stability here. So a Speedlight is portable flash. So does he mean another kind of light, like maybe a monoblock?
Oh, I think when he says a portable strobe, maybe he's thinking bringing an actual studio strobe on versus a speedlight. Maybe a larger strobe versus a
Well,
speedlight, or
there are more powerful flash units that are called monoblocks. Some run on battery. Some you plug into to an AC outlet. Those are larger, heavier, but not. I mean, they're very doable. You can easily put them in a suitcase wrapped up in clothes, and check them in an airline, for example, if you're traveling, or they easily go in the back of any car because they're small. The advantage of those kinds of lights, there's basically three. They have more power, which gives you the ability to shoot your subject further away, use a smaller f-stop, and so on. They often have a modeling light, which gives you a little bit of a preview of the way the shadows fall on your subject. And you can attach to them things like a softbox or a white umbrella. So those are very good, and in fact, I'm doing a photography tour to Indonesia in August, and I'm going to bring one of those because I have a particular shoot in mind that I want to use them on. So they're very doable. They aren't that expensive, like $400 or $500 for one of these things, which is about the same price as a good Speedlight. So if you want to really control your light, have more power, have bigger diffusion or better diffusion, then a monoblock is a really good way to go.
all right. And next question here comes in from Sandy. Sandy asks, says, all of your animal eyes are so natural looking. How are you shooting with flash and achieving this?
That's a great question. The thing I do is clone out the reflection of the flash. I don't like that look. Some photographers want the catch light. I like a catch light too, but it has to be natural. If you do a portrait outside with fill flash, the catch light looks like an unnatural dot of light in the eye. And with an animal, a natural catch light of the sky is so attractive. So one solution, see if you clone out the catch light and then you have a black pupil, you may not like that. So what I do is I look through my file of pictures and I find a close-up of an animal with a natural catch light in the dark pupil. I select that, I copy it to the clipboard in Photoshop, and then I paste it into the eye of the animal where I use the flash. And now there is a natural catch light that looks great.
Okay, great answer. Next question here comes in from, this is from Kevin. And Kevin, you may need to go in more detail. Question is, what is your opinion on continuous lighting from on camera or off camera?
Yeah, I know what Kevin's talking about. When he talks about continuous lighting, there are these banks of fluorescent tubes.
Mm-hmm.
And they give a very nice, soft, attractive light. The big advantage, I'll tell you, there's one big advantage and two disadvantages. The big advantage is you can see how the shadows fall. You can see the light ratio on your subject. The disadvantages are they don't give as much light as a flash, which means that if you're shooting something that has any kind of movement, you're not going to be able to use a fast enough shutter speed to freeze it. And they are fairly sizable to carry around. You're not going to carry one of those things to Carnival in Venice or somewhere else that you're traveling to because they're just too unwieldy. So they're great for that soft light that you can see exactly what you're getting. But those other disadvantages are why I've never bought one.
That's a good answer as well. All right, and this question is more of an opinionated question from Mark. Would you bag your radio transmitter, like your Pocket Wizard or Radio Popper, in favor of the simplicity of a Canon EX600?
Yes. Simple answer, yes.
Great. Okay. All right. And these questions come from back when you were showing off the example with the multiple pieces of paper. So John asks, was the reason that you had multiple pieces of paper was because you didn't want light to overflow or to flow over the paper?
Yes. That's one reason. The second reason is the larger the panel, whether it's fabric, paper, plastic, whatever, the larger that illuminated panel is, and in this case the light is basically illuminated, the softer the light will be. You see? And the closer it is to the subject, the softer it is because it appears from the subject's point of view large. So I wanted a really nice soft light on the little girl.
Great. Yeah, John says yes, thank you. He sees it. Okay. All right. And let's see what other questions we had came in here at the end. Okay, this is a question from Jennifer. Jennifer asks, if my sync speed on my camera is 1/200th of a second and I'm trying to expose for the background of a sunny day, that sync speed always overexposes the background. What do I do?
It overexposes the background. Well, then you have to use a smaller lens aperture. Well, actually two things. You can lower the ISO, and or you can use a smaller lens aperture. So let's see, 200th of a second. Yeah, like if you used f/22 with 200th on a sunny day, the background will not be overexposed.
Perfect. Okay, and let's see if we had any other questions here. Okay, Robin asks, when using the plastic diffuser, do you point flash directly at the subject or bounce it?
That's another good question. You can do either. Most people have the flash pointing straight up. Pointing the flash with the diffuser at the subject is a little harsher than pointing it up. So, like I said, most photographers will angle it upward, and that way they'll get the most attractive type of light with that plastic diffuser.
All right, and I think we've got most of the questions. Oh, a few more just came in, so let's grab those. And as we near 3 p.m., everybody, we are going to just take a couple more questions, and we'll be all wrapped up here. Okay. First off, Barry says, thank you for laying out all the common problems we find with Flash. It made me feel like I wasn't crazy, and was good to see my frustrations aren't unusual. Barry, I'm sure a lot of people are in that same situation, including myself.
Well, not a lot of people, everybody. Really, because we all have the same problems, and if you don't know how to fix them, you know, that's one thing, but you think that you must be doing something wrong. It's just the nature of light, and it's the nature of a single source of light sitting on the camera that presents all the problems. Everybody has it. Everybody's frustrated by it, and you know it's a very vexing problem.
Absolutely, it sure is. Well, this webinar helped out a lot with clearing up some of that fog, especially for myself. So I want to thank you again. If you just wanted to pull up your website, Jim, it'd probably be easier since you're on your machine. If you can just show everyone your website real quick. I know you have a very well-built PhotoBiz site. Just wanted to let people know how to check out that your magazine sign up, and you guys can visit this as well.
Here's the website, and at the very bottom, you can click here to sign up for the mailing list to receive the magazine. And if you go a little bit below that, here is the April issue of the magazine. You can click it, and it takes you to the hosting company of this magazine, and the pages flip really cool. It's like looking at a magazine. So you can see this month's issue, and then if you want to get them every month, just sign up, and it's free, and it's devoted to photography and Photoshop.
Well, great. Well, I know that that's a great resource and for everybody inside of the webinar today. And if you you want to learn more information about any of the educational resources that Jim offers, you can view them on his website at jimzuckerman.com. Well, I think we are just about out of time, everybody, so wanted to first off thank everybody for attending. And Jim, thank you again for putting together the presentation today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Okay, everybody, well, we're going to go ahead and sign off for the day, and we hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you in our next webinar.